Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased today to welcome Andrew Montford from the Global Warming Policy Foundation. And the foundation has done a lot of work about the net zero target for 2050, explaining a lot of the consequences of that policy so that it's sort of accessible for ordinary people to work out what the impact of this is going to be. And I thought we could just spend some time with Andrew just talking through the work that he's doing and the foundation is doing. And also, he's put out a pretty impressive report quite recently showing a figure of about £3 trillion for net zero by 2050. So, if it's okay, I could pass over to you, Andrew, to introduce yourself and the foundation.
Yeah. So my name's Andrew Montford. And I guess the first thing I should say is that while I do still do lots of work for the Global Warming Policy Foundation, my main role actually now is within Net Zero Watch, which is our sister organization, which is a campaigning organization. So we're campaigning for rationality on climate and net zero. The foundation is a charity, an educational charity, which is sort of has a mission to sort of educate the public about the science and economics of global warming. We're a tiny pair of organizations. You know, there's four members of staff spread across the two organizations. But we have a big pool of people that we can call on to help us with these with specific issues. The foundation has a big academic advisory council of really very eminent economists, scientists, engineers, people like that who ensure that the work we do is of a consistently high quality.
Yeah, I think also I noticed that the size, as you said, is very small in compared to the money that's going in, for example, into lobbying for the green agenda, I guess you could call it that.
We rely solely on donations to keep us going. I mean, the what was pointed out to me recently was that the salary of the chief executive of the UK's climate change committee is actually higher than the total income of the Global Warming Policy Foundation. I mean, it is absolutely extraordinary that there is this myth put around that we're funded by big oil, and you have to wonder if big oil are funding us, can they really not afford more than four people in a tiny office in Westminster? I mean, it's absolutely absurd, the conspiracy theorizing that goes on about GWPF and Net Zero Watch, but that's the world we live in. People have rather lost the plot on these things.
It's become very cultural war issue, and I guess we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is very definitely cultural.
Yeah. I thought we could just start with the actual beginning of this, which is the 2008 Climate Change Act. And the issues you're raising now of costing, at that point back in 2008, was there really anything in the way of costing back then, and where has it got to now?
Um, yeah, there has really been very little attention paid to the costs. It tended to be just sort of waved away without any attention at all. The famous story is that Peter Lilly, at the time that the Climate Change Act, at the time that was going through Parliament, he went and asked for the cost-benefit analysis. I think they're required by law to produce such a document, and he was told that there wasn't one. There was very little attention paid to costs. It was all done sort of, just with a wave of the hand. It will be fine. Technology is going to improve, and it's going to be marvelous. Once the targets started coming in, they said, it started off, I think, at a 65% reduction in CO2 emissions, and then we got 90%, and now we're on to 100%. And again, there was very little attention paid to the costs when the 100% net zero target was put in place, the Climate Change Committee actually put out a lengthy report explaining why it would be wrong to produce a cost-benefit analysis. They know what they're doing, and so they have this sort of waffly report to hide behind. Yeah, it wasn't until we decided, I guess this was probably 2020, perhaps, at the start of lockdown, we decided that we would really home in on the costs, because that was the only thing that was going to change people's minds. You can argue the science until you're blue in the face, but most people don't understand the science, and it just goes over their heads. So they are inclined to treat the climatologists as a priesthood, and they will just take their word for what is in, if you like, the Bible, the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But we did feel that people would notice once they started to feel the financial pain, and that if we could point out to them, where this pain was coming from, what was causing it, then they would sit up and take notice. And that has been exactly what's happened. People are realizing that that their bills have gone up. Obviously, we've had an energy price crisis, which caused, mainly by the war in Ukraine. But the fact remains that people's bills had gone up substantially before war was declared. In fact, electricity prices doubled between the introduction of the renewables obligation in 2002 and sort of 2020, before the Ukraine war started. That's the effect that decarbonisation is having on people. Also, I think in the aftermath of lockdown, people started to realise that it was going to affect their lifestyles as well. That they weren't going to be able to travel. They maybe weren't going to be able to go to Torremolinos for their holidays or whatever. That they wouldn't be. Not everybody would have cars any longer. This kind of thing, and that's the kind of thing that people feel strongly about, because these things are important to people. Being able to travel to see your relatives is vital these days. If that's taken away from you, that is a serious business. And the climate extremists, will just sort of wave it away again and just say, well, you'll just have to put up with it. Oh. So the costs has been a productive area for us. I'm an accountant by background. I haven't actually worked as an accountant for many years, but I trained as an accountant. So this, if you like, was what I could bring to the thing, was being able to analyze the costs in a sensible way. And you don't actually need to do anything very sophisticated to come up with some really quite scary numbers. I spent a long time looking at the costs prepared by the Climate Change Committee. It actually took quite a lot of time and effort to get hold of their calculations. They really did not want anyone to see the justification for the net zero target. But the high level figures that they'd put out just sort of set the alarm bells ringing. So you looked at the list of numbers, and it said, switching to electric vehicles is going to save us £4 billion a year. And you're going, well, how does that work then? An EV is much more expensive than an internal combustion engine. And the insurance costs are high, and if you need to replace the battery, that's really expensive too. How are we going to be saving money? So I spent the best part of 2 years doing an FOI case, and we actually had to end up in the courts to force them to release it. Eventually, the courts ruled in our favor, and we got hold of the calculations, and the assumptions that they had made were, I can't describe them as anything else other than lies. They were lies. They were saying that an electric vehicle is more than £10,000 cheaper than a petrol or diesel car today. If you try that at your car dealership, you'll be laughed out of the door. It was just an attempt to deceive the public. Another thing we came up with was that their electricity system model, obviously, it relies on wind. And, the big issue with wind is that the wind doesn't always blow. And so the more the wind blows, the better it is. In their assumptions, they had assumed essentially that windless days were going to be a thing of the past by 2050. And again, that's not science. That's not a mistake. You can't accidentally reach those conclusions. It was just an attempt to deceive the public. So the whole thing has been a bit of a scam, really. And I've been very interested that both Rishi Sunak and Philip Hammond, now Lord Hammond, who was the Chancellor when the Conservatives put the net zero target in place, they've both come out and said that successive governments have deceived the public about the cost of net zero. And it's this kind of thing. This is what they mean. And this is something that needs to be absolutely hammered home in the media, was that we have been deceived, but we still haven't heard what the truth is. Rishi Sunak has said, okay, we tricked you, but okay, now tell us the truth. And the truth is much, much worse than the government would have you believe.
I mean, it's a big question as well, that the whole process of approving these monumental pieces of legislation, that it's just not possible to do that properly without knowing the costs. Like you said, in the 2008, nobody had really looked at the costing at all. And even going to net zero in 2019, also kind of nothing. How can parliamentarians vote for things they don't understand the downstream consequences of?
Yeah, of course. Nobody has the time or mostly the expertise to analyze these kind of calculations. I mean, there's huge swathes of spreadsheets justifying all this. So MPs don't have time to do that. So when a government minister turns up in Parliament and says, we're going to do net zero, it's going to cost not that much, 1.5% of GDP a year. They shrug their shoulders and they say, okay, fine, it's going to be cheap. The experts say so. The Climate Change Committee has said so. People will just accept that in Parliament, and in many ways you can't really blame them. They don't have the resources to analyze it. But yeah, 1.5% was simply not true. It was a lie.
Yeah. I mean, I fished some numbers out of the models for the 6 carbon budget, which I think the FT wrote an article about, that if they produced the chart, which is the capex per sector, and if you add that up 2020 to 2050, that number, which was understated probably pretty significantly, was 1.38 trillion, and so that's about £50,000 per household.
Yeah. Okay, so no, okay, so so if you call it 1.5 trillion and 30 million houses, so you're yeah, that's right. Yeah, so okay, yeah, 50,000 a household. Yeah, that's right. That's kind of similar to the number that was used to justify the original net zero target. It's as I say, it's junk. There have been other estimates put out. There was one from National Grid, which wasn't supposed to be comprehensive. It didn't cover all sectors of the economy, but it did the big ones. And they said it would be 3 trillion, which is £100,000 a household. I did my own one, which really only covered the power system, cars, transport, and housing. And I came up with a figure of 3 trillion. So, I was kind of going at the time, probably 4, 5, 6 trillion would be, was probably what we should be expecting to see for the whole economy. That's now moved on quite a lot. The Royal Society produced a report a couple of weeks ago about large-scale energy storage, which was quite interesting, because what they did was they've got estimates of wind farm output going back nearly 40 years. And I don't know if you remember the winter of 2009, 2010, which was essentially there was no wind for a long, long time. There was a whole period of 2 years, really, where wind speeds were very low. And they pointed out that actually this was a real issue. If you're running a fully renewables grid, you need hydrogen storage, but my goodness, you need a lot of hydrogen storage. So I've been doing a lot of analysis on that, and it's actually worse than you think, because they didn't take into account that the demand would have gone up in that winter as well, because it was so cold. The winter was really, really cold. They've just assumed constant demand, and well, that just isn't true. So the store is even bigger than you think, and you know the number of wind turbines you're going to need is even bigger. So the numbers I'm looking at the moment are suggesting it's probably the power system alone is a £2 trillion problem. So, you know, you add on everything else, and yeah, we're probably, you know, we are back into that 4, 5, 6 trillion kind of ballpark. So, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds per household. Another way you can look at it is it's delivering 5 HS2 projects every year for 25 years. Which, when you put it in those terms, you just realize, you know, it's an impossibility. It just isn't going to happen. We don't have the capability to deliver projects of that size. So it's not going to happen. So the question is, how long is it going to take until the wheels come off? And it looks like they're starting to come off now. I think you'll agree. You know, there's you know, a lot of people are starting to ask questions that they just haven't asked for the last 20 years. And you know, some of the newspapers have even turned against net zero, which is, you know, quite extraordinary.
And I put up some, because these trillion figures are kind of hard to get your head around. So I mean, even at 3 trillion, as you said, that's about 100,000 plus per household.
Yeah.
And it's about 50% more than the entire market capitalization of the UK. And it's about 30% more than the entire debt of the UK that we've accumulated forever, essentially.
Yeah.
So I mean, these are mind-boggling numbers that, and as you sort of hinted, the Climate Change Committee tends to put sort of figures which are investment net of savings, where you can make up whatever savings you want in the future, and therefore they show a small number. They don't show the actual capital you need to invest over and above the as is situation, and that's your 3 trillion number. If they were quoting that, they'd probably say it's going to be 200 million, because net of savings, net of something else, net of borrowing, they leave you a small number that doesn't really represent at all the capital.
Yeah,
got to
of course. Yeah,
the
the counter argument to that is that if there are net savings, then it should be happening spontaneously. So, you know, if EVs really are £10,000 cheaper, why is everybody not buying EVs off their own backs? And of course, you know, they're not. So yeah, they can't really argue that with a straight face, but you know, they have to try, because you know, there is just so much political momentum to do the whole net zero thing, because you know, people believe it. You know, people believe the scaremongering, and you know, they've stopped being rational about it. So yeah, the costs though are, they keep coming out, don't they? There's you know, we keep getting new and scary costs that we hadn't thought of emerging. You know, there was, I don't know whether you saw the one a few weeks back, you know, the decommissioning the gas distribution grid was going to cost £60 billion. I mean, what's £60 billion between friends? You know, nobody had thought of that, and then suddenly, you know, that's something else you've got to pay, and that's you know, a whole lot more money.
I think you made a key point there, which is this isn't a market-based mechanism in any way. This is not a sort of bottom-up, people-driven process. So I think, for me, the big issue, this is now centralized top-down planning, the likes of which the UK maybe has never seen. I don't know, but this goes well beyond sort of Soviet-style planning, where the government says, you know, and you've hinted at as well, that you won't be flying, you won't be driving, you won't be eating this much meat. I mean, they're trying to regulate literally every aspect of human life top down, which I think for me is the big issue.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is, there's been a lot of talk in recent months of climate catastrophism as a quasi-religion, and of course, religions do aspire to universality. They do want to affect every aspect of your life because that is part of keeping the religion together. So whether eating less meat is going to make a difference to the weather in 2050 or not, they want you to eat less meat because that is you paying due respect to the religion. And it helps sort of bind people into it. So, they will keep doing these things no matter how irrational they are. I mean, so many things you see where they're clearly going to make no difference to the weather at all, but you're expected to do them, and that's a religion at work.
And I think you have on your website or on GWPF website a book which is available as a PDF as well, about the sort of cult nature of some of this.
Yeah, okay. This was a book called The Grip of Culture, which we have just published. It's by a chap called Andy West, who spent a long time analyzing public opinion data about climate issues from around the world. Big surveys, run by people like the UN and big polling organizations. And what he shows is that you can actually explain what are apparently inexplicable changes in views if you consider climate catastrophism to be a religion. So if you ask people, how do you think climate change is going to affect you in the future? It's a rather vague sort of question about, if you like, the scary aspects of climate change. Then people will say, yes, I think it's going to be absolutely terrible and it's going to affect me. And more so in religious countries, interestingly. But if you turn it around and say something like, okay, well, where is climate change on your list of priorities as compared to other spending commitments? It's exactly the opposite. People in religious countries are less concerned. So it's kind of odd that if you ask one type of question, you're apparently more concerned about climate, but as soon as you introduce a bit of reality, like how much you're willing to fork out to pay for this, they all say, oh, well, we're not really concerned. And that is because it is a religion, and the only thing that religions will yield to is reality, and those spending decisions are essentially reality. It's a very interesting book, and it's completely changed my view of what we're dealing with. I've spent 10 years trying to be rational and to explain people in logical, rational terms why net zero is a bad idea. But once you realize you're dealing with religious fanatics who don't care about facts and logic, you understand why we've made so little headway until we started getting into the costs. And once we started pointing out the costs and saying this is going to cost you money, and look, it is costing you money already, then suddenly people go, well, maybe I don't actually care about that, the weather in 2050 quite as much. And, oh, maybe I'm not being told the truth about what the weather in 2050 is going to be, because, of course, nobody actually knows anyway. So, very important book. And, I think it does essentially give us a way forward, if you like, in that we have to keep banging on about the costs. And the sacrifices and things like, as you alluded to before, things like the loss of freedom. You won't be able to travel to see just wherever you want, when you want. You may well be locked in a 15-minute, city or a ULEZ zone or something. That's a serious restriction on your freedom. That is the kind of thing that will change people. I'm very interested in organizations like the Together Declaration, who've made a lot of progress, fighting on ULEZ, which is not directly a climate issue, but it is a proxy for the climate issue. People, if you like, the Greens are using that as using ULEZ and the idea of particulate pollution as a way to get people out of cars, and that's getting people out of cars is part of the the part of the climate war, if you like. So, but together, I think have done a very good job. They are changing people's minds by getting out there in the streets and talking to people. So again, you know, hard reality will change people's minds in a way that discussing the science won't.
I mean, ULEZ is the same story, but presented from the angle of health. We're all going to make you healthier by preventing you driving, and it doesn't work when you actually pick apart the logic of that. It also falls to pieces. Again, the restriction on people's lives, their freedom, economic activity, all of that will massively outweigh negligible impact on particulate matter. So it's another
Correct.
con.
Yeah, I think that, and the science on the idea that there are all these thousands of people dying from as a result of particulate pollution, you know, every year in London is frankly nonsense. I mean, it's computer models layered on more computer models, and it's classic junk science. But you know, this is very useful to activists. So you know, they will keep on doing it until we fight back against it.
Yeah. And, you know, as well as the cult aspect, I have to ask you, you know, political aspect, because I mean, it's not a secret, I guess, that the sort of more radical side of the climate debate tends to be associated with the more sort of radical left kind of politics. And I put up here an article from one of the Labour MPs saying we can't defeat climate change without defeating capitalism, and actually linking those two things directly, which is something they don't very often do. But how much of sort of non-capitalist politics, I guess if you'd call it that, is using the climate agenda as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously it has been a big thing on the left, and you know, particularly the Green Party are a very left-wing organization. But you know, it pervades the Conservative Party as well. You know, there is a huge swathe of the Conservatives who are very green, and you know, they are. I think, you know, there is probably, you know, 25% of the Conservative Party is green, 25% is skeptic, and 50% are running their own careers. But the 25% who are green are enough to stifle any sort of meaningful change. You know, I think the Uxbridge by-election was interesting because, you know, that we had somebody standing, you know, at least on a anti-ULEZ ticket, and who did very well. And, you know, there was a poll bounce for the Conservatives. And, you know, we did wonder for a time whether this would lead to further steps. As it is, it doesn't appear to have done. I think, you know, Rishi Sunak has had to give further concessions on things like subsidies for heat pumps and things. But you know, I think he is now under a lot of pressure from the skeptic wing of his party, who are pointing out that, you know, there are probably votes to be had in standing up to the green blob, if you like.
And sort of that brings me a bit to the organization of GWPF, because you have some, I guess, political traction somewhat, in that you've had MPs as trustees and former minister as a trustee. Are you seeing sort of traction on your activities now?
Not a huge amount more than we have done. Yeah, we've always had, you know, some MPs from different parties as well, who want to talk to us, want to hear what we've got to say. But, you know, there is such a sort of a wall of green nonsense that stops people. You've got to be pretty brave to step out of line on the climate issue. You will take an absolute pounding in the media if you do. So, you know, it's only people who are pretty secure and are brave and you know, possibly even senior enough not to care too much about what people say. Those kind of people are the only ones who can do very much. Yeah. So yeah, there are hints that there are more people out there who want to hear from us, but it's not, there's nothing overwhelming yet. I think in reality, we're probably not going to see huge amounts of change until after the next election. The Conservative Party is kind of, it's pretty dysfunctional at the moment because it's got this division. So until it changes one way or the other, I think people don't know which way to turn, do they? I mean, if you are a skeptic like me, do you vote for the Conservatives? I mean, you might get more greenery. That's what we've had for years. But if your vote goes to one of the minor parties, well, then you get Labour, who are even greener. And there are no easy ways out at the moment. But eventually the political establishment is going to have to come to terms with the fact that this is an impossible project and that they have led us down an absolutely disastrous blind alley. I mean, this is net zero is a mistake of historic proportions, and we've got to come to terms with that. Somebody eventually will have to pluck up the courage to say so and tell the public we got it wrong. And yes, we've cost you a huge amount of money, and we've probably knackered your children's futures. But now we're going to change. But I don't know who's going to do that.
And we don't know how much of the 3 trillion is going to be spent between now and then. I guess that's
well, of course, we're tied into a lot of it. So all these wind farms we've got, they have contracts for 15 years or whatever. So they are going to, once they're built and once they're in the system, they keep getting their subsidies forever and a day. So it's very difficult to reverse out of this. It is actually a problem that we have given some thought to. It's like, okay, if a government did turn around and say we want to get rid of net zero, what could you do in the short term? I mean, in fact, it isn't easy to think what you could do with all those wind farms, because all the wind has made any form of energy essentially uninvestable. Nobody wants to build nuclear power stations in the UK because they don't get to run, because you've got all these wind farms there and the wind farms have subsidies. Nobody wants to build a gas-fired power station for exactly the same reason. So, how do you get energy security and cheap energy back again? That it's a really hard problem, and one which probably is going to involve spending a lot more money to get rid of them. It's a mess.
Yeah. This is why I'm not such a big fan of centralized planning. Whenever big government does big government projects, a lot of money tends to get wasted.
It is a huge centrally planned project. Everything is government planned. I mean, it's interesting. It may well be that the last vestiges of market influence on the energy system actually have to be done away with, because the whole thing is so dysfunctional at the moment. It may be that nationalization is the only way out of it in the short term. It pains me as somebody who believes in free markets to say that, but in the short term, it may be you have to nationalize, and then you have to think about reprivatizing in a sensible way once you've got rid of the wind farms. But yeah, that's for the future.
Yeah. So, I mean, the best thing, because I have a lot of material on the GWPF website. I mean, I read quite a lot about this issue, and I hadn't until recently come across those reports. So I've put some up on the screen as we've spoken. So I think the best thing is if people go there and read. I think for me, they're all very interesting, but the 3 trillion figure was very interesting, and it's very well explained in a short summary. So anyone that's got a genuine interest in looking at those figures can just go to the website, right? It's the GWPF.org, if I remember rightly.
That's correct. Yeah. We found over the years that if you have short papers, people are more likely to read them. So yeah, the 3 trillion one is only about 6 or 7 pages or something. So yeah, it is the high level calculations are very simple. It's just arithmetic. It's like, this is what it costs for a petrol car, this is what it costs for a battery car. If you have 30 million of them, this is what it's going to cost you. So yeah, it's easy.
Once people are educated on the sort of GWPF side, on the net zero watch side, would you encourage people to contact MPs and start really asking some serious questions about cost impacts and impacts on quality of life from all of this?
Yeah, I think MPs, particularly if they're getting not sort of form letters, but they're actually getting individual letters written by concerned citizens about what's going on, they will sit up and take notice. But there does have to be a certain degree of weight to it before they will pay attention. Net Zero Watch and GWPF, Net Zero Watch is a campaigning organization. We're not really focused on grassroots campaigning. So getting people to write letters is not really what we do. The Together Declaration do that kind of thing. They've got an ongoing No to Net Zero campaign, which I'm very excited about. I think it will make a difference. And they, I think, are encouraging people to write to MPs and advising them on how to do it. So they're a good place to visit for the man in the street, if you like. Yeah, our focus is much more on Net Zero Watch on influencing influencers and newspapers and people like that, and politicians, if you like. In some ways, I guess we're the air war, and Together Watch are the more of a ground war than us. Yeah.
Well, that's very good, and I definitely encourage people to go and look at those papers. And I think also in the Daily Skeptic now, they're running. I mean, we've put a few articles in there about these issues, about the real cost of offshore wind is extraordinarily high. Actually, it's totally the opposite of the political slogans that we're fed. And that's also, I mean, there's some good articles in there sort of debunking some of these sloganeering from the politicians.
Yeah, again, you see, that's another big sort of disinformation campaign that the Green Blob has engaged in. That this idea that there has been a cost revolution in offshore wind. This is something I have spent a lot of time over the last 2 or 3 years doing. I'd say I'm an accountant by training, so I've got out the financial accounts of every single offshore wind farm in the UK, and you can see that the costs are not coming down appreciably. Yeah, they're coming down a little bit, but there hasn't been a revolution, and the operating costs are going up. The operating performance has been very disappointing, actually. And so, yeah, the overall costs remain extremely high, but this disinformation that it's really cheap is all pervasive. So I talked about the 3 trillion figure that National Grid had produced, but underlying that are these false claims about the cost of wind farms. So the real number for National Grid's model is even higher, because they haven't taken realistic wind costs. Same for the Royal Society report. They're basing their numbers on the Whitehall numbers, which again are based on the disinformation. So it is all pervasive, and until somebody in authority, essentially, I was kind of hoping Rishi Sunak would do it when he said we'd been deceived. I want him to stand up and say, yeah, all that stuff about cheap wind, that was a lie. Okay. And then we can start to look at these things rationally. But at the moment, yeah, you're just having to deal with the lies.
Yeah. Good. Well, let's hope more people understand. And as you said, there's different groups doing different things. So at least we can limit the amount of the 3 trillion that has to be wasted before this really comes back to bite people badly, and they see their living standards eroding.
Yeah. We'll keep our fingers crossed. But yeah, I think it's got to get a bit worse before it gets better.
Good. Okay. Well, on that semi-optimistic note, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.